In our next set of lectures, we're going to be examining issues with commas. However, there are numerous grammatical issues that arise with commas, so we're going to be separating them into different lectures. Within this lecture, we will be looking at commas and introductory elements. Before we examine introductory elements, however, let's take a quick look at what constitutes a sentence. Let's examine the following example. Ben enjoys listening to music. Within this sentence, we will see that we have an action verb, enjoys. In addition to enjoys, we have a subject. In order to find this subject, we need to ask ourselves who or what the verb. So who or what enjoys listening to music? We know that the answer to this question is Ben. So a sentence is constituted of a subject, a verb, and a complete thought. And we will discuss these elements in more detail later within this lecture. So an introductory element is something that comes before our main subject, but that does not modify or describe that subject. Introductory elements can come in numerous forms. They can be words, they can be phrases, and they can be clauses. So we will take a look at each of these introductory elements in turn, beginning with words. When we are examining words as introductory elements, there are some words that come before our main subject, after which we will need a comma. Generally, when we have a single word as an introductory element, that word will be an adverb. In order to examine words as introductory elements, let's return to our example sentence. For this sentence, we can add a word to the beginning, such as frequently. We know that frequently does not modify Ben, because frequently Ben is not a type of Ben. When we look at frequently further, we'll note the ly at the end. An ly generally denotes that a word is an adverb. So since we have an adverb before our main subject, we know that we have a single word introductory element. When we have a word as an introductory element, we need to place a comma after it. Frequently, comma, Ben enjoys listening to music. We could also have the following word. Occasionally, Ben enjoys listening to music. Again, we realize that this word is an introductory element because it ends in ly and is not modifying Ben. We might also have a word such as today. Since today denotes when Ben enjoys listening to music, today would be considered an adverb. Let's take a look at another sentence. The new car was in the shop. In order to begin analyzing this sentence, let's first find our verb and our subject, as then we will be able to identify if we have any introductory elements. Within this sentence, we should see that the verb is was. We can then identify our subject by asking ourselves who or what the verb. So who or what was in the shop? From this question, it's clear that car will be the subject of this sentence. We can then see that we have two words before our main subject, the and new. It is important to remember that we only have introductory elements if the words do not modify the subject. So let's examine these two words. We can see that new is actually describing the subject. It tells us what kind of car it is. It is a new car, and therefore new would be an adjective. The same is true for the. An and the are always adjectives, and therefore the also modifies our subject. As both the and new describe car, we do not have an introductory element within this sentence. Let's take a look at one more example. Yesterday, the bird flew into the window. Within this sentence, let's begin by identifying our verb. We should be able to identify the action verb flew. We then need to identify our subject by asking ourselves who or what the verb. So who or what flew into the window? Our subject then would be bird. Before bird, we can see that we have two words, yesterday and a. As we just mentioned, a, an, and the are always adjectives. Therefore, a is describing bird and is part of our subject. However, we also have the word yesterday. Since yesterday denotes time, it answers when a bird flew into the window, it would be considered an adverb. Therefore, we will need to place a comma after yesterday. Yesterday, comma, a bird flew into our window. In addition to words as introductory elements, we can also have phrases. And the most common phrase that will occur at the beginning of a sentence is a prepositional phrase. In order to examine prepositional phrases, let's first discuss what a preposition is. And in order to do that, let us look at the squirrel's relationship to this house. Currently, the squirrel is outside the house. Prepositions show relation. So within this sentence, outside would be considered a preposition because it shows the squirrel's relationship to the house. Within this sentence, we have another preposition. The squirrel is on the roof. Here, on would be considered a preposition because it shows the squirrel's relationship to the roof. The squirrel could also be beside the roses. Here, beside is a preposition because it shows the squirrel's relationship to the roses. The squirrel could also be behind the house, or it could be with its friends. In addition to these prepositions, which clearly show relation, we should also be aware that the word of is considered a preposition. So within each of these example sentences, we have a preposition. And prepositions introduce what are called prepositional phrases. After each of these prepositions, you will note that there is a noun: roof, house, and roses. A prepositional phrase begins with a preposition and ends with a noun. Therefore, everything from on to roof, outside to house, and beside to roses would be considered a prepositional phrase. If we have a prepositional phrase at the beginning of a sentence, we will need a comma after it. Let's take a look at an example sentence. In the forest, the bear climbed the tree. To begin analyzing this sentence, let's first find our verb. Here, we should be able to identify the action verb climbed. We then need to ask ourselves who or what the verb in order to find our subject. Who or what climbed the tree? Clearly, the bear is the one who climbed the tree. We can then see that we have a number of words before our main subject: in, the, forest, and the again. We should by this point be able to identify the as an adjective describing our subject. Therefore, the is part of the subject of this sentence. However, at the very beginning, we should also note the word in, which would be considered a preposition. Therefore, everything from in to forest would be considered a prepositional phrase. If we have a prepositional phrase at the beginning of a sentence, we need to place a comma after it. This sentence would then read, "In the forest, comma, the bear climbed the tree." Let's take a look at another example sentence. Behind the seat, you will find a car jack. As with the previous sentences, let's begin by identifying our verb. Hopefully, we are able to identify the verb will find. So, who or what will find a car jack? Here, the subject is clearly you. You will find a car jack. We then have a number of words before our main subject. Analyzing these words, we should be able to identify the preposition behind. This indicates that we have a prepositional phrase which runs to the next noun, which is cite, meaning that we have a prepositional phrase beginning the sentence and therefore will need a comma after this introductory element. The sentence would then read, "Behind the seat, comma, you will find a car jack." Let's look at 3 other example sentences. After dinner, we should go for a run. Of all your ideas, this one is the best. Under the porch, he found a rabid raccoon. While we could go through and analyze each of these sentences, finding our verbs and then our subjects, we can also note that each of these sentences begin with a preposition. Generally, when sentences begin with prepositions, we will need an introductory comma. After we see prepositional phrases, we can identify the first noun and then place a comma after that prepositional phrase. After dinner, comma, we should go for a run. Of all your ideas, comma, this one is the best. Under the porch, comma, he found a rabid raccoon. We can have words, we can have prepositional phrases, and we can also have clauses at the beginning of sentences. Before we examine introductory clauses, we need to examine the 2 types of clauses that exist: independent clauses and dependent clauses. Let's begin by examining independent clauses. By looking at the sentence, "We should go to the store." Independent clauses require 3 elements. They must have a verb, they must have a subject, and they must have a complete thought. Within this independent clause, we can identify the verb should go. We can also identify a subject, we, and this independent clause also has a complete thought. We should go to the store. We should consider independent clauses to be sentences. Now that we have examined independent clauses, let's look at dependent clauses. Like independent clauses, dependent clauses will have a verb and will have a subject, but they will not have a complete thought. Let's consider the following example. Since we are out of groceries. This clause possesses a verb, are. It also possesses a subject, we. However, it does not possess a complete thought. Since we are out of groceries, leaves the listener hanging. Therefore, it cannot be considered an independent clause. However, we can join a dependent clause to an independent clause to create a complete sentence. Since we are out of groceries, we should go to the store. This sentence has both a dependent clause and an independent clause. As the independent clause can stand alone, we and should go would be considered our main subject, and our main verb. Since we are out of groceries would then be considered an introductory clause, and we would need to place a comma before our main subject. There are numerous words that can introduce clauses. Since, when, because, while, if, in order to, that, although, once, after, and unless are a few of the most frequently used introductory words for clauses. Let's take a look at another example sentence. When you were hunting, someone from the bank called. Let's try to identify the verbs within this sentence. We should be able to identify were hunting as a verb, as well as called. We then need to identify our subjects by asking ourselves who or what the verb. Who or what were hunting? You were hunting. Who or what called? Someone called. As we have two verbs and two subjects, we're likely dealing with two types of clauses within this sentence. We now need to identify what clause is the dependent clause and which clause is the independent clause. Hopefully we can identify the word when as an introductory word for a dependent clause. We can check this assumption by taking each section of the sentence separately and seeing if it possesses a complete thought. Someone from the bank called. This possesses both a subject and a verb, as well as a complete thought. When you were hunting. While this possesses a subject and a verb, it does not possess a complete thought. Therefore, we would need to place a comma after this dependent clause that is beginning our sentence. When you were hunting, someone from the bank called. Let's take a look at three other example sentences. After we ate dinner, we went for a run. Because you did not pay the bill, they shut off the power. Although he went to college, he is not very smart. While we could go through the process of finding our subjects and verbs for each of these sentences, we might also note that these sentences begin with signal words for clauses. After, because, and although are all signal words that denote a dependent clause. If we know these words, we can then find the end of this clause and place a comma. After we ate dinner, comma, we went for a run. Because you did not pay the bill, comma, they shut off the power. Although he went to college, comma, he is not very smart. You have now been introduced to how commas work with introductory elements. Introductory elements can be words, phrases, or clauses. If a word, phrase, or clause comes at the beginning of a sentence and does not modify its subject, we need to place a comma after these. Before we quit today's lecture, let's take a look at a few additional examples to solidify what we have learned. Before the concert, we should be sure to buy snacks. Let's begin by finding our verb within this sentence. Should be would be considered our verb. We then need to ask ourselves who or what should be sure to buy snacks. We answers this question and therefore would be our subject. We should also note that we have words before our main subject, and we should be able to identify before as a preposition, indicating that we have a prepositional phrase. Everything from before to concert is part of this phrase, and therefore we would need a comma after concert. Before the concert, comma, we should be sure to buy snacks. Let's look at an additional example. After the meeting, Tim decided to search for another job. While we could find our subjects and verbs within the sentence, if we have a keen eye, we'll note that the sentence begins with a preposition, after, indicating that we have a prepositional phrase beginning this sentence. Prepositional phrases run from the preposition to a noun, therefore we know that we need to have a comma after meeting. After the meeting, comma, Tim decided to search for another job. Let's examine another sentence. Although rain is predicted, I'm going golfing this afternoon. Let's begin by identifying our verbs. We should note the verb am going as well as is predicted. We then need to identify our subjects. Who or what am going golfing this afternoon? I am going golfing this afternoon. Who or what is predicted? Rain is predicted. As we have two subjects and two verbs, we're not dealing with an introductory word or an introductory phrase. We're likely dealing with an introductory clause. We next need to identify which of these clauses is the dependent clause and which clause is the independent clause. Analyzing this sentence, we should see the word although, which indicates the beginning of a dependent clause. Again, we can double check ourselves by taking each portion of the sentence separately. I'm going golfing this afternoon has both a subject, a verb, as well as a complete thought. Although rain is predicted, while it possesses a subject and a verb, does not possess a complete thought and is therefore our dependent clause. We then know that we need to place a comma after this introductory dependent clause. Although rain is predicted, I'm going golfing this afternoon. Let's take a look at another example. Surely the company will not go bankrupt this month. While we could find the subjects and verbs of the sentence, if we look at the word surely, we'll note that it ends in an ly. Therefore, we are likely dealing with an introductory word that is an adverb. If we have an adverb at the beginning of a sentence, we will likely need a comma immediately after it. Surely the company will not go bankrupt this month. Within this lecture, you have learned how to identify errors with commas and introductory elements. Introductory elements can be a single word, they can be a phrase, or they can be a clause. Identifying these different introductory elements will help us identify one place where we need commas. In subsequent lectures, we will look over other comma errors that often occur within student writing.